Cool.
Well, good morning. My name is Susie Reid and I'm an occupational therapist at the Mendip School, and this is Liz, our speech and language therapist, and Simon, our music therapist. Good morning. We've been approached by Julie Walker to do a presentation for the SEND Network. And when we were approached, we had a real think about what would be most useful. We've been asked to do an hour-and-a-half presentation. What would be most useful, excuse me, for Senkos in the locality to hear. We're a team that obviously we're based in a special school. We've got a lot of experience in special school classes. We're also a team that's also got quite extensive experience in mainstream schools and are still involved in inputting into mainstream schools and implementing strategies in that setting as well. So we've thought perhaps integrating therapeutic strategies into the classroom environment would be a really something that might be useful for Senkos in the area. I think what we'd really love to do is for you to go away with some very practical strategies about how you can do things here and now in your classroom, and for us to really show you very practically how that looks. So we're going to do three learning outcomes. Each of us are going to speak for half an hour. We're going to have an overview of the sensory systems and to look at practical strategies that you can use in a classroom. And then Julie has asked me to talk about the Children and Young People's Therapy Service sensory pathway, and I'm more than happy to do that and to signpost you with how to get involved with that pathway and how best to use that pathway. I don't know if you want to say your name.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about how to create a communication-friendly environment in your settings to support all children. And going to give you an overview of 2 useful approaches for mainstream settings.
And I'm going to talk about understanding the importance of kind of building relationships and how to attune emotionally to our learners, and think about some simple approaches that can be used to effectively support our students in the classroom environment.
Brilliant. So I'm just going to quickly introduce ourselves. I'm Susie and I'm an occupational therapist based at the Mendip School. I also am involved in private practice, so I'm going regularly into mainstream settings. I also work with the virtual schools team on their traumatised child training package. So I've got a lot of experience of working in specialist settings, but also a lot of experience working in mainstream settings. I've got a background in working with sensory difficulties and especially children who have experienced complex developmental trauma.
Yeah, so my name's Liz, and this is my 3rd year working at the Mendip School. And prior to working directly with the school, I was an NHS therapist. So I went into mainstream and specialist settings to assess children, give advice and programmes. So I've got sort of experience of both mainstream and special school work.
And I'm Simon, and I've been working as a music therapist for 6 years. 4 of those have been at the Mendip School, and before that I was working in mainstream settings in the community, kind of working with children that had music therapy as part of their education healthcare plan.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to start off by talking about the Children and Young People's Therapy Service. So I actually did work for the Children and Young People's Therapy Service for about 8 years, and I've been working for the Mendip School for 2 years now. So when preparing this presentation, I did check in with the CYPTS service to see where they're at. I have worked on their sensory pathway, but to see where they are at the moment. And what I hope to do today in half an hour is really to give you an overview of how you can access that service and best use that for the children you work with. I think as well, they often ask you to go off and do sensory strategies with a child, and what I'd really like you to do is very practically show you how some of the strategies we use here and that I collaborate with other schools in using, what they actually physically look like. And there's two things that I'd really love to go through with you, which is 1, the therapy role, and 2, a regulation kit. So I'm just going to talk to you now about how you can use the CYPTS. They have a sensory package pathway. They have a video training session, which is available to all of you as Senkos. So what happened initially was that video training session would have been linked to a child that had a referral. So it might be you've not seen it because it's often sent when an individual child is referred. And when I spoke to them last week, they're really happy for any SENCO to access that training. So if you want to email them from their website, they will send you a QR code and then you can access that video. Now that video is much longer than we're able to do today. It will be much more comprehensive. So I think if you want a more comprehensive overview of the theory of sensory processing, it'd be really good for you to access that training. Just a word about that training. The training video went live in the first 2 weeks of lockdown. So it was recorded very, very quickly, really to get all the information that was possible out to schools and parents when we knew we were all locking down. Initially, that training was always done face to face, and that was my experience of that training. So what's happening now is that training will be re-recorded and updated, because obviously it was carried out in a time that was very stressful for everybody. The sensory pathway, you refer a child and you can refer from a link on the website, and you will access a phone, the parent, and you can sit with the school and do this as well. You'll access a phone call with a therapist who will write a sensory plan up for that child. Now, initially, the therapist wasn't writing the plan up, but now they will write the sensory plan up, so everyone's really clear about the ideas that you try with that child. You have 8 weeks to trial it, and then the family can opt in to a face-to-face appointment with a therapist, which is great. I think obviously during lockdown that went virtual, so people were accessing a phone call, and now they can access a face-to-face appointment, which is great. So what I'm going to do now is do a really quick whistle-stop tour of some of the theory, bearing in mind that you can, if you access a much more comprehensive training package if you want to know more about it. But I'm going to go through some of the basic concepts, and then really what I hope to do is spend most of my time really practically showing you what that might look like for when you're practically in a class with a child in front of you, and how that looks here, how I collaborate with other schools to help embed that in their classroom environments as well. So a lot of you will know that we talk about seven senses. So there's the 5 senses that are traditionally talked about: sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell, vestibular and proprioception are the 2 we don't talk about as frequently. So vestibular is our sense of movement through space. It gives us information about where we are in space, how we're moving. It's also the thing that keeps us up against gravity. So our muscles are able to kind of stay firm and come up against gravity, and you're not all floppy and low. It can tell us how we move back and fro, and it also tells us how we move in a spinning circle. And you might see some of your children using those movements, going back and fro or spinning in a circle when they're gaining sensory input. And proprioception is the other sense that we talk about a lot. Proprioception is a massively important sense. It tells us where our body is in space. A lot of the receptors are located in our joints and in our muscles. It's extremely important in function. If you don't know where your body is, then it's very, very hard to function. And this is the reason why some of our students really find it quite hard to shut their eyes, because if they have got poor proprioceptive feedback, then they find that really hard to know where their body is in space. One of the main things I talk about through sensory training is how important proprioception is in regulating our bodies. So if you remember one thing from today, really, it's that proprioception is the big regulator. So some of our children seek that movement, but often it's not regulating them very well. And it can send their arousal levels higher sometimes, whereas proprioception is something that really can be used and can take a child from feeling very overstimulated and calm them, or very understimulated and arouse them. And the challenge for us in classrooms is, how does that look in our classroom? How do we, within the pressures and the busyness of your classrooms, how do you get increased proprioceptive input in for our students? So having said that there are 7 senses, there's an eighth sense that's being spoken about quite a lot, which is called interoception. It's basically a sense that provides information about the internal condition of our bodies, how it's feeling on the inside. So it's linked to knowing that you need a toilet, knowing that you feel hungry, knowing that you feel thirsty, and it's being spoken about in the context of how can you go on and recognise your emotions unless you recognise actually physically what your body is saying to you. How can you recognise you're frightened until you can really feel that your heart rate is racing? So here at the Mendip School, we are implementing an approach called the interoception curriculum, which is helping our children connect more with their bodies. Obviously, as a mainstream setting, you probably don't have access to that, but even using language and building children's awareness of how their body's feelings can be really important. So after PE, can you put your hand on your heart? Can you feel your heart racing? A warm cup, can you feel that's really warm? Just really helping our students become in tune with their own bodies and recognise that. Just a lovely picture of the sensory gang members, which this is a really lovely book to use with your students if they've got sensory processing difficulties. There's like a physical kind of representation of all our senses. Really quickly talk about the sensory processing tree. So you can see there that you've got a tree and you've got the tactile, vestibular and proprioceptive roots coming in. So tactile, vestibular and proprioception are the senses we really need to help develop our skills, motor, sensory skills. You can see there by the tree, you've got loads of lovely fruit coming off that tree, or leaves, body awareness, postural security, ocular motor skills, motor planning. These are all things that blossom when you're getting good sensory feedback to your body. If you're not getting good sensory feedback to your body, it doesn't mean the tree isn't blooming completely. What good sensory feedback to your body leads to is just you thriving, and that's what we want our children to do, to have the right sensory basis for them to be able to thrive in all of their other skills. So again, we talk a lot about, again, when you listen to the training package from the CYPTS, they will talk a lot about modulation difficulties. So some children may present with a mixture of being over and under sensitive to different senses. This is probably a typical pattern. It's not unusual. I would say it's typical that children have modulation difficulties. So they swing from oversensitive to undersensitive. They may do that within a day. It might be quite unpredictable. But again, remember, proprioception is our great regulator. Getting more proprioception into our environments for our children means it doesn't matter if they're oversensitive or undersensitive, because proprioception can regulate both of them. The challenge for you is how do we fit it into your classroom with your students in the setting that you're at? And that's what I collaborate with mainstream schools around. I just wanted a quick word around sensory overload. So this is extremely common, especially in very busy mainstream classes. That's when a sensory system just becomes completely overloaded by the senses in the environment. And what happens then is your protective responses are activated. So your body actually begins to say, okay, I'm feeling in danger now, I'm not feeling safe. So these are automatic responses. They happen without being planned. They can often look really out of proportion with the situation. So suddenly it gets very loud and a child becomes really scared. There's thunder outside and a child goes into fight or flight. It often can look out of proportion to a situation, but for that child's body, that's what their body's telling them, that they would need to respond to danger, and that's like the overactivation from sensory overload. So it's the overactivation of our protective senses, which are there to keep us safe. So when we talk about protective, about fight or flight responses, these are the overaction of those protective responses. So you get fight, you can see aggression or protective behaviours. You can see flight, so that's running, just needing to get away, which is also that fight or flight overprotective response that's being activated. A more worrying one that I find is freeze, because we don't always respond so proactively to the freeze response. A child might shut down and start to just go into themselves. Their bodies are just as much in distress as the student that's in fight or flight. and we need to watch out for them. Often they're not on our radar as much because the fight or the flight responses are really, they call for our attention. And then there's another response being talked about called fawn, which is kind of an over-compliant response. And I think that's something that we really need to keep an eye on for some of our students as well. They really want to participate, or are they just becoming over kind of compliant to just get through the situation? So really look at a child's demeanour, sweating, dilated pupils, you know, are they in one of those fight or flight responses? So moving through this really quickly so that I can get to the really practical strategies to show you. What the other thing I really wanted to talk about was just to teach about teaching regulation strategies when your student is actually already regulated, and doing something like a little chart like this. So it can look like many different things to many different students, but what we can't do is expect our children to access them only when they become distressed. We've got to teach them these strategies when they're calm, they've got to be available for them, and they've got to have practiced them when they are calm, and then they're there for when they start to escalate or become distressed, and you've got them there as a kit. So the idea of sensory strategies is that you use them really, really proactively. So it's not just a response to a student becoming distressed or deregulated. If you know a child's got a sensory processing difficulty, that those strategies are proactively used throughout the day. And this is where I really wanted to show you some of the proactive, very practical strategies that we both use here in the Mendip School, but that I collaborate with mainstream classes about whether they can use in those settings as well. So I'm going to ask Simon to just, you're going to be able to see.
Yeah, we're just going to back out of this a second. Hello. And then move the camera down to here. Yep, that's about it.
Okay. Yeah, we've got it. Yeah. So I wanted to show you the therapy roll or therapy peanut that we use. I think this is one of the most practical and useful things you can have in a classroom, and there's lots of ways that you can gain good proprioceptive feedback through this in a classroom setting. So let me show you some of the main ways you might use it. So for me, rolling over a therapy roll is really one of the most useful things you can do. So this is our therapy puppet Leo. He can't put his hands on the floor, he's too short. But actually rolling and putting your hands on the floor is a really lovely way of gaining proprioceptive and a bit of movement feedback in your class. So this is an activity you can combine with lots of other activities. So for example, quiet reading, you could do quiet reading in this position. You could do a puzzle in this position. There's lots and lots of tasks that you can do like this, and if you've got an area in class that you can have this, then it can be something that a child can do on transition in and out of the class as well. So just a few minutes having a bit of a roll can really help a child's body to regulate. So that there's lots of students that I really recommend rolling for in a class. The other one is really straightforward, so that would be sitting on your therapy roll, because you're able to gain a little bit of therapy input. So I've got lots of students that are sitting on therapy rolls to their desk and just gaining some input like that. If you put the therapy roll this way, it fits really nicely under a desk. If your student is physically able, you can get them to straddle that roll, and that gives even more therapy input, and it tucks nice and easily under your table. So if a student's got enough postural control, sitting like that under a table is a really lovely thing. If you want some nice activities to co-regulate with your student, and if that's a really important thing for a student's regulation, having them there and you doing that, particularly nice for very young children. For an older student, you might want to push on the roll with them, say push, push, can you push me away? Push, push, push. Or you might want to bang on the ball, which is a really big sensory input and gives lots of sensory input to the body. So that would be ready, steady, bang, 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 bang. And there's just a few ways that you can do co-regulation with a child within a couple of minutes. Another thing you can do to help regulate a student, but you need to do this really cautiously, is squash the student. So if I'm squashing a student, I would always be at that student's head, looking at how they are, making sure they're not being over compliant with me and making sure that they are okay with what I'm doing with them. I'd probably try and make physical contact, like with their hand, and I would gently begin to squash, and I would always I'd always ask consent, and I'd always give them an opt-out. So, Leo, would you like some squashing? Yes, so squash, 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 squash. Would you like more, or would you like to stop? To stop, fine. Or I might see that they're saying, no, I like more, but I can see from their face that they really aren't very comfortable with that. If they're happy with being squashed, it can be an extremely powerful way of gaining lots of proprioceptive input and really being able to calm. So the therapy role is one of the main pieces of equipment that I think is really useful in the classroom environment. The other thing I really wanted to show you today was regulation kit. So here at the Mendip School, and I recommend it in mainstream schools, we build regulation kits for students. So each student will have a different regulation kit where we put all of their items, and within it we agree what they find useful to use. So I'm going to go through some of the things in here. So we have these warmies. They're heavy beanie warmies. You can put them in the microwave and they smell of lavender. We find these really useful for students who need to have 5 minutes to regulate just walking out of class, or emotionally they need 5 minutes to regulate. So they can request from an adult to go to a microwave, get these heated up, and then they become very warm, and just holding them, having 5 minutes go to warm them up can be enough just to bring a student down and help them regulate. So these warmies come in these lovely different animal shapes. So again, that's their own. They've chosen an animal which can be really, really regulating for them. Bubbles are extremely regulating. They visually can be very, very calming. It helps the child to regulate their breathing and to have a moment just to think about their breathing in and out. So most students have got bubbles in their regulation kits. Some students have a balloon in their regulation kit. Again, blowing up a balloon really helps you regulate your breathing. That could be a really useful thing to have in there. We have lots of visual timers, which just watching that can sometimes help keep a student focused and calm. We have these tactile brushes, which are really great. So lots of students, if you've got a student that really wants to give themselves a lot of tactile input, they can give themselves some tactile input with this. If you've got staffing, obviously they can collaborate with that. We often stick them underneath the desk so a child can just gain some sensory input with the sponge stuck under the desk. I'm sure you're all familiar with ear defenders. The current advice is you don't wear them for more than 20 to 30 minutes at a time. Otherwise, the child habituates and you're going to make their auditory sensitivity more pronounced. We find vibrations really powerful in regulating. I'd be very cautious with how you use vibration at first. It can be a very powerful sensory input. It can be very useful, but when you first use it, really stop and make sure you look at students' response and make sure they're not getting overwrought by that sensory input. Then little fiddle toys like this can be very useful. If you're worried about how a student is using a fiddle toy in the classroom, you could get online a fiddle toy contract for teachers, whereby you agree with your student what are the parameters of the use of that fiddle toy, and we found that very useful. And then lastly, obviously, I'm sure you have students who need to access chew toys as well, so we put those in their regulation kits. by letting a student build their own regulation kit, you're helping them own it, and you're helping them, and we write out a little kind of table of what they use things for and when they use it. And again, the idea is for it to be very, very proactively used in class. We've got a few, I'm very aware of the times, we've got 3 presentations, but I'm just going to go through a couple of other things which I've got time for. So the weighted blanket is obviously very useful. Just having something heavy on your lap or heavy around your shoulders can be useful, just to give that student a little bit of grounding in the classroom. Safe spaces and dens are very, very useful, to find a corner of the class where you can put a blanket or put a blanket over a table, have some sensory equipment, create a safe sort of womb-like space for a student in a class. So many of our students find that really, really helpful. I'm going to talk briefly about the body sock. So this is an envelope of lycra that a child can climb into. So some children like to climb in it and they become very curled up and fetal. It gives them good sensory feedback that way. Some children might like to get into it and extend and stretch and find that sensory input really useful. So that's also an option for you in class. And then the last thing I think I've got time for is the scooter board. Use of the scooter board will be really dependent on your school. And so I've been into mainstream schools that are very modern, we've got beautiful big long corridors, and then use of a scooter board is very easy and useful for you because you can go with a student up and down the corridor. If you're in an older school with porta cabins, it might be that that's not a useful way of regulating. The 2 ways we use it here is you can lie on it and you can get the student to pull themselves along with their arms like that. You need actually really quite good postural control to do that, especially if you're on a carpet. But for some students, that will be really, really regulating for them. But if you've not got good postural control, you're going to find that really hard strength-wise and coming up against gravity. One of the main ways we use here, which we really love, is we sit the student on the board. We get the student to hold on to the body sock or the lycra. So Liz, could you see that? Yeah. Of course. The student holds on to the lycra and the adult pulls them around school. And this is a really lovely regulating activity. It gives a huge amount of sensory feedback because the student's having to tense their body and guide you, but massive amounts of co-regulation because you're having to work as a team because I'm walking backwards. So tell me where the door is. And we use that a lot here in our school, but we do have quite nice open corridors. So that was a real whistle-stop tour of some practical strategies for sensory processing. Again, I think the main point is try and get more proprioceptive into your classroom environments, make it proactive, and also you can see we're doing a huge amount of co-regulation within that as well. So I'll now hand you over to Liz, who's going to present speech and language therapy.
Thank you, Susie. So I am going to give an overview of speech and language strategies and resources that can be used in the classroom. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of what speech, language and communication needs are. Then I'm going to talk about how we can create a communication-friendly environment. So that's there's 3 sort of bits to that. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the use of visual support systems. I'm going to run through staff communication, so how adults communicate with children, and then touch on sort of the classroom, the physical classroom environment. And then I'm going to talk briefly about two specific approaches which I think are really applicable to mainstream settings. So the first one is word aware, which is a whole school approach to vocabulary, and the second one is colourful semantics. So just thinking about what speech and language and communication needs are and what they look like. So a child with speech, language and communication needs, their speech might be difficult to understand. So that's sort of what we might call pronunciation of words. So you might have children that have delayed speech. They might say something like saying fish as bish. Or you might have children in your settings that have a speech sound disorder. So maybe they're making some more unusual errors. So maybe they say fish as gish, for example. Then there's children that sort of struggle with forming sentences and choosing the right vocabulary and knowing the right vocabulary to use. And then there's children that struggle with that understanding. So not understanding the words that are used and not following the instructions that they hear. And then you have also sort of children that might have difficulties knowing how to talk and listen to others in conversation, so more with that social interaction side of things. And obviously children can have difficulties in some of these areas, or they can have difficulties in all of these areas. And it's just to make you aware really that it can often be called like a hidden disability, because children that maybe aren't understanding language, they might appear inattentive or like they're not behaving. So it can get missed. So it's just worth thinking about the children in your settings, and is there something else going on there? Have they got an unmet sort of an undiagnosed speech and language difficulty? So I'm going to start talking first about visual support systems. So I can't really overestimate how important they are. And I think this picture shows nicely the 9 key reasons why they're really important. So visuals are permanent. So children that maybe struggle to remember things, visuals don't go anywhere. So the spoken words disappear, but the visuals don't. And linked to that, really, they allow time for language processing. So if a child can't hold a lot of language in their head, then visuals allow for that because they stay there. And they really support with transitions. So they've got first then, so we use now and next here. You can also use sort of objects to support transitions and photos, things like that. And they support, the visuals help with understanding. So they show children what you mean. If they don't understand the word apple and you show them a picture, that's going to help them. So they show you what you mean. And they build independence. So you can see in that picture there, the child's got the little tick list. So following like that task plan, and they can do it themselves because they've got the information there that's all broken down for them. They're transferable, so they can go from home to school. And they have no attitude. So they're just there, they've got no judgment in their voice. So they can be really useful, especially if a child's struggling and can't sort of process a lot of language in that time. So just having the visual there. And we know that obviously that it really helps reduce anxiety. So helping children know what to expect and helping them know what's coming up. So yeah, I just wanted to show you some examples from the Mendip School. So we've got labels on rooms to show what the rooms are. So we've got like the toilet there. We've got simple sort of visuals for following a little sequence for hand washing. We've got labels so kids know what are in drawers. And we've got, we'll try and make sort of information accessible using visuals. So that's one of our safeguarding posters that we've made using visuals. And just a couple of tips really would be to make sure that they're at the right height. So having them lower down in your reception classes, so they're at the right level for kids. And if you can see that there's quite a lot of glare on the safeguarding poster, and that's because that's not been used, not been laminated with matte laminate. So it is worth getting some matte laminating sheets, because they're much easier to see basically. And you can see that, yeah, that poster it's been used on gloss and it's a bit glary. So that's a good example of why you should use matte laminate. And the classics, so visual timetables and instructions. So these are different sort of visual timetables that you might want to use depending on the child or the class. So that example there at the top is from our reception class, and the key is that the teacher will be drawing attention to that throughout the day. So you can see that the kids, because they're all scrunched up, and that's because the kids are actively involved in that. So the teacher would say something like, music has finished, child can take music off, and then now it's time for phonics. So you're constantly referring to it and engaging the children in it, rather than it being sort of a passive thing up high that maybe kids aren't so aware of. Then there's just a nice example of using photos and visuals for following instructions. So that's making a cup of tea, really useful in cookery. And a classic now and next board. So don't feel like you have to have lots of laminated and ready to go symbols for every possible thing that you're doing, because that's never going to happen. All you really need is a whiteboard and a pen, and just draw something simple, because that can be really powerful. And you might want to, if with older children, maybe you could have a timetable for a longer amount of time, if that's helpful for them. So maybe something like a month that we've got here, showing when they're on their residential, when they're at school, and when they're at home. Some more visual supports that we use. So these ones are really useful for maybe children that are non-speaking. So we have a set of what we call objects of reference. So I've just put 4 of our sort of standard ones that we use there, just as example. So maybe if children can't access symbols yet, it's just a way of using objects to represent an activity. So you would introduce maybe just 2 or 3 to start with. You give the child that object and you take them to that activity. So a wooden spoon for cooking, and you take them there. And then when children start to associate that object with that activity, you can then use it to make choices. Do you want to do cooking or art? And you can also use it similar as a visual timetable once they start to get that connection. So you could put the objects in the order that you're going to do them that day. And also you might want to use photos. So if children aren't responding to symbols, you could try photos. That might be more accessible for them. And I've just put up an example of one of our core boards that we might use. So these are, so it's the Twist and Shout there, which is our music therapy group. So a core board has really useful and functional vocabulary on it. So that would be the left-hand side of the board. So the I want more, you like stop, it is my, go not, help. So they're really useful, functional words to model to children. And then the other side would be specific to the activity. So that's all things specific to potentially a music therapy group. And the idea is that you model it without any expectation on the child. So if a child's non-speaking, you might just be modelling lots of single symbols. So you might be saying, oh, scarf, pointing to the scarf. Or you might be saying, oh, I really like it, I like it. So you're just, it's all on you, you're modelling, just like the way we model verbal language to speaking children. If we're modelling symbols, if we want a child that's non-speaking to start pointing to symbols, we need to be modelling that to them by using them ourselves. yes, that's really important to model without expectation. And I just put Makaton on there because that's obviously really useful, and another visual support or gesture or any of the signing. And just to talk briefly about using visuals for making choices and talking about feelings. So I've just put a really simple choice board there. So that's obviously just got 2 choices. Do you want to go to the sensory room or soft play? But depending on the child and their ability, you might want to have more choices on there. And talking about emotions, that can be really hard for children. So, I mean, it's hard for adults. So having those visuals there to sort of facilitate talking about how we might be feeling can be really useful. And I've just put some examples there. And these are my top tips for visuals. So just to go over it really. So just think about using visuals that can be understood. So if symbols are too difficult, then you can think about using objects or photos. Use a whiteboard. So don't feel like you've got to have loads of printed and laminated symbols. You can just use a whiteboard and a very simple line drawing. Pitch them at the right level. So you might want to just start with a now and next for a child. And then maybe you might want to do part morning, and then maybe the whole morning, and then maybe they're ready for a day's schedule. Really important, if a reward is on their schedule, don't take it away, because they need to trust that schedule. If there's things that happen that can't be avoided, you know, swimming's cancelled or something, you can have like an oops card to use in that situation. And don't take visuals away when they're coping. So sometimes I've seen this happen before when I think, oh, they're fine, they don't really need that, and they take it away, but they probably do, and that's probably why they're coping. So don't take them away. I mean, we use visuals up until, you know, post 16 here. And yeah, as I said, so have the visual timetable where it can be reached and used, and refer to it throughout the day. So we use widgets online here. So we've got a school account. So we're obviously quite lucky. But just to really signpost you to widget, because they do so many free resource packs, you don't need to log in or anything. You can just go and download a PDF with loads of visually supported activities. So I've just put some examples. So they did one for the coronation, and they quite often do like relevant topic-based ones. They've got one for helping refugees communicate. So if you have any Ukrainian refugees in your school, that could be really useful. And if you want to, you know, focus on creating a communication friendly classroom, they do a back to school toolkit, which is totally free, and it's got symbols for, you know, labeling your classroom, and yeah, it's well worth a look. So I'm just going to run through some really simple strategies to use with younger or older children. There are obviously a lot more than this, but I've just picked 3 for each. So for younger children, it would just be about, so the first one is encouraging an asking friendly environment. So you want to create a culture where children are encouraged and praised to say when they don't understand. So that might be something really simple like doing the thumbs up, the middle or the down, or having a visual with traffic lights. So encouraging that sort of comprehension monitoring environment is what we'd call it. And the second one for younger children would be, so adults commenting and narrating their play during everyday activities using really simple language. So I think, you know, we've got a natural tendency with kids, we want to ask them questions, we want to say, what's that? But really the most useful thing for language development is to just be modelling really simple language, narrating what they're doing. They take the lead and you just map that language onto what they're doing. And that's going to really help them learn that what they're playing with is a train, for example. And when you are playing, you can extend their language. So if they say, oh, red train, you can repeat back but add a word. So you might say, oh yeah, fast red train. So you're just modelling back but extending their language. And another really good thing to model back is grammar. So younger children, they're still developing their grammar, and they might say something like, we go to the park, and you say, yes, we went to the park. So you're not correcting them, you don't ask them to say it back, you just acknowledge what they've said, but you model back the accurate grammar. So for older children, it's really useful to use simple short sentences, so chunk instructions into short and simple chunks, and give them time to think. So sometimes we say, oh, if you could just, give them that instruction, count to 10 in your head before saying something else. So you're giving them that processing time. Again, you still want to be encouraging children to say when they've not understood. So you want to check their understanding. So maybe ask them, say, also, tell me what do you need to do after you've given them an instruction, or ask them to explain the instruction to a peer, so you can see have they actually understood. And again, modelling language, so giving support when needed, and modelling back, and maybe using those conjunction joining words to extend what they're saying. And so just a very brief run through of the physical environment. So it's just really like basic things like, is the temperature right? Is the lighting right? Is there a really noisy fan that you could turn off because it's really distracting? So thinking about auditory distractions, and also thinking about visual distractions. So here we have very plain walls, and that is really purposeful. So we're reducing those visual distractions. And have they got enough space to move, and they're not all sort of bunched up together? And then echoing really what Susie said, are there quiet areas they can go to? Because that's really important. So really just to think about your settings and think, is your school communication friendly? So I've given you a really brief introduction to creating a communication friendly environment, but there are some really useful tools that you can use. So I've put the link there, it's free to download. So that one is quite a detailed audit tool that you could use to go into classrooms and do some observations. So that is specifically for EYFS reception year 1 and year 2. The same website have just some more brief sort of checklists for both primary and secondary. So it's worth just having a look at, and maybe you could pick something, like one thing that maybe you want to, improve in your settings. And I think this is an example of the audit tool. So that's just with someone who's done some observations. So I'm going to briefly, so I've only got 10 minutes, so I'll just 5 minutes for each one. So I'm going to talk about Word Aware, which is a whole school approach to vocabulary, and colourful semantics. So Word Aware is an approach developed by 2 speech and language therapists, and it is for the whole school. So it's a whole school approach to vocabulary, and it develops both spoken and written vocabulary. And it's full of really practical and inspiring ideas that can be easily applied within everyday teaching. So it doesn't put too much sort of extra stress on teachers once you've got your head around how it works. In the books, it takes about a year to sort of implement across a school, and it's nicely set out, and it sort of tells you what to do each term. So they use a specific approach within Word Aware called the STAR approach. So basically S stands for select. So it talks through how to select the best words to teach. So it's those really useful words that they're likely to encounter again. So you might have learnt them as tier 2 words. So it's talks through the best words and how you select them. T is for teach. So this is an example of how you might teach a word. So I think this is habitat. Yeah, this is habitat. And so it runs through, talking about phonological information about the word. So what does it start with? What does it rhyme with? How many syllables has it got? It goes through the grammatical elements. So, putting it in a sentence, and then also thinking about the meaning. So it's not just about looking up the meaning. So to really learn a word, you need all that can really help embed that word learning, doing all those parts of it. And then the A stands for activate. So that is basically practical activities around learning the word and discussions you can have as a class about the word to really embed that learning. And then review. So if I go back to this one, so basically you put the words that you're teaching up on your word wall in the classes, and at the end of the term they can go in a word pot, which you can see bottom right here. And then throughout the year you might do a 5-minute filler activity where you pull words out of the word pot and you revise them, because that reviewing and revising the words is going to mean that children really retain them. So yeah, it's a whole approach. There's training you can go on. Some schools have just done it by buying the book and running with it, but Stephen Parsons and Anna Brannigan do training in it if you want to go for it as a whole school approach. So hopefully that's something that you can look into if you think it could be good for your school. And then just going to touch on colourful semantics. So it's a system to support spoken and written language across the curriculum, and it helps with lots of things. So vocabulary, so learning new words, producing longer sentences, organising words into sentences more accurately, so giving children that structure for creating a sentence. It helps with understanding WH questions. You can also use it for narrative, so sort of improving their storytelling skills. So it's got a real breadth of use. So this is an example of a colour-coded sentence. So orange words tell us who. So who is doing the eating? The mouse. So the mouse is orange, coded orange. Yellow words tell us what doing. So what's the mouse doing? Is eating. So is and eating is yellow. And then you would say, so what is the mouse eating? So green words tell us what? A nut. And where is the eating happening? So on the rock. So all the words that answer the question where would be blue, so on the rock. So that's a sort of basic colour-coded sentence. I just wanted to give an example of how we use it here. So we are creating symbol sets that go with books. So this is one mole digging a hole. So you would maybe read the book. You'd give an example, so choose a page and model placing the symbols on the strip and saying a sentence. And then you can maybe start asking the children, so let's think, who is in the picture? So then you can give them, depending on the child's ability. So here I've just done 2 symbols out. Is it a snake or a bear? But if a child's, more able, you could have more symbols out, or you don't have to have symbols at all. You can just get them to draw it. So you would go through, so you'd ask who is in the picture, what are they doing, and then and what are they doing it to? So you would support the children to select the right symbols, put them on the strip, and then you can say the sentence. So the child might say snake, rake, earth or soil, whatever it is, snake, rake, soil, and that's fine. And then you would just model it back with all those little grammatical words. You say, yes, the snake is raking the soil. So that's a really sort of basic run through of colourful semantics, but I just wanted to show you how you can add to it. So there's lots of colour coding that you can do. You don't need to learn it all. You just pick what you want to work on with your class. So for example, if you're working on adjectives in colourful semantics, we would call that cloud words, because they can float around the sentence. So if we go back to the mouse is eating a nut on the rock, if you were working on adjectives, you could say, oh, let's add a cloud word to that. So you might say, the mouse is eating a brown nut on the rock, and then brown would be your cloud word that goes with the nut. So that's just, yeah, an example of using adjectives. And then here's some examples of how we use it at school. So GIFs are really engaging for kids. So there's a website called Giphy where they're doing silly actions and things. So you can use it with that, and then getting them to make a sentence to describe the GIF. Using photos of children. So that can be really motivating for younger children, is to have a photo of them doing something and then making a sentence up about it using the symbols. You can also differentiate it for higher level language. So you can work on things like joining up words. So you can see that there's, so purple is for joining up words, conjunctions. So they've used like loops to join, purple loops to join sentences in that top right one, or you might do roll a conjunction and then make up a sentence. So it's just, yeah, it makes language really visual and really accessible for kids. And lots of teachers love using it for supporting writing. So I've put an example of a book there, a writing book. So you can, get children to maybe choose the symbols and then write the sentence underneath it. Or if they don't, they don't need the symbol, they can just come up with it by themselves. You could just give them like an orange line, a yellow line, and a green line, and get them to write a sentence. And it can help with things like finger spacing. And then I've just put the Gruffalo there. So that would be an example of simplifying it. So just doing a who, what, doing. That's, you just want children to start by using those simple sort of phrases. Maybe if they're just using lots of single words. So you could say, the Gruffalo, what's the Gruffalo doing? Is he walking or running? And then you're just working on that sort of simple phrase level. So that was a really, really quick run through. So I wanted to signpost you to, there's a free course on the Speech and Language UK website. And I think it's really useful for Senko. So it's half a day, and it really goes into a lot more detail about how to identify children that might be struggling and what support you can offer them. So hopefully, yeah, if you want to go into it in more detail, then that's worth checking out. And that's it. So I will hand you over to Simon now to do his bit. Thank you.
Oh, hello. We are nearly there. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of emotional regulation and kind of some strategies that we can use to support our students. So first, I just want to talk about what emotion regulation actually is, and that is it's a key skill that we all need. It's an ability to notice and name our emotions and effectively manage our responses to them. A developing child's ability to manage their emotions kind of depend on a number of factors. This can be genetic, temperament, environment they grow up with, and outside stresses. And it's such a complex process to develop, and it takes our childhood and early adolescence to do. And we need kind of attention skills, we need planning, we need cognitive development and language development. And kind of as a child, the most important people that regulate us emotionally are our parents, our teachers, our caregivers, and it's kind of this whole circle around you as a child that can help to develop that. So developing emotion regulation skills, it's not a skill that we're born with. We're reliant on those around us to help us develop this. So as an infant, we learn to manage feelings by an adult being with us in this feeling. This is opposed to focusing on the behavior. This will help us to understand that we are safe, that feelings are okay, and that they will pass. And research has shown that children as young as 2, whose caregivers have taken a being with approach, are less demanding, more responsive, have fewer tantrums, and it really just shows that supporting children to regulate their emotions from birth is such a crucial part of their development and emotional well-being. Which leads me on to kind of a really kind of core skill that we think about with our work at the Mendip School, and that is attunement. So, and that is that idea of being with a child and their emotion. We need to be emotionally attuned to them. We need to know how to respond to a child when they are overwhelmed, and kind of help them to feel safe and understood. We need to be able to read a child's emotional cues and match them with an appropriate response for them. Being emotionally attuned doesn't mean to kind of like over-identify with the child. So actually, if one of our children are highly anxious, it's not helpful to also kind of match that anxiety with them. It's a really important part of this, and something I will talk about is also kind of thinking about being aware of your own feelings and managing your own feelings before we attune to a child and kind of help them to co-regulate. Yeah, and a considered emotionally attuned response will help children to co-regulate their big feelings, and it's a massive part of building trust and connection with our students. So I'm sure you've probably all seen this, but it's such a lovely example of just how important attunement is. And they'll talk about how babies and infants kind of are reliant on their caregivers to help them with their emotions. And this is a really young baby here. And you can just, it's so visual, the difference between kind of an emotionally attuned adult and one that's not emotionally attuned, and you'll quickly see the difference in the response in the child.
Babies,
Becca, if the audio isn't playing, please just give me a shout. It should be though.
this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reaction. She's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
Oh, my girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good.
Great. Let's go back to slides. I think that just that really shows how quickly kind of a child can become dysregulated without that support, but also how quickly they can become regulated again with that adult to kind of be there with them and kind of attune to them. So as children grow up, they still need an adult kind of to help them regulate their emotions, and this is true right through to kind of adolescence, as we learn those skills. And yeah, it can be true of older children at times of crisis, or those that weren't supported to regulate their emotions as an infant, or in the case of kind of children at our school, children that have difficulties for whatever reason in kind of regulating themselves. So just another little video break is just it's just from another lovely film, and it just really shows kind of some really misattunement from one of the characters, and then a really attuned kind of verbal response. I'll just show you this.
New Star Wars Micro Galaxy Squadron.
Lots of iconic vehicles to collect.
New Micro
Hall of Fame. My rocket! Wait, Riley and I were still using that rocket. It still has some song power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket to the dump. Riley and I are going to the moon. Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey! There's the train!
That film's Inside Out. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend. Cool. So we just see that how quickly kind of an emotionally attuned, appropriate response can be, and it really does look like that, kind of not in a cartoon, but it's kind of something that we do regularly at the school. And I just want to kind of think about Joy, the character that was quite misattuned at the moment. Kind of these are some really common traps and some things to really think about that can kind of quickly cause a misattunement and be really unhelpful for students. So that kind of like when anyone is struggling with emotions, particularly kind of those really big emotions like anger, sadness, grief, it can be really easy to fall into these traps. So one of them is kind of trying to be overly positive or encouraging. So just saying things like, just stay positive, everything will be fine. The idea of kind of minimizing, like, it's no big deal, don't worry about it, it doesn't matter. Kind of distracting things. So we saw Joy pulling faces, trying to kind of make him laugh. Again, that's kind of, I think that's quite an easy one to fall into in the moment in a school environment, but actually it's not that helpful for our learners. Another thing that you really want to do is to give advice. So like, if I were you, I would do this. And then if you just pick one of these to absolutely avoid, that is punishment or shame. So actually, like, look what you've done. Like, why have you done this? Those kind of things are like actually really quite damaging to hear for our children when you think about in terms of regulation and things like that. So it's really easy to do, and again, this just goes back to that importantness of like really considering kind of how you're going to respond to the child and what you're going to say and what you're going to do. And kind of a lot of these responses are really tied to our emotions. So actually thinking about yourself and why you might fall into one of those traps as well. Like, it's usually because we're feeling anxious, we're feeling uncomfortable, we don't know the right thing to say sometimes, and we just want to make things better. All of these things are really natural. They're kind of things that we really want to do for others. But if you just kind of like slow down and really consider, is this going to be an attuned response? The answer is usually no, it's not. So, emotion regulation systems. So this is a really helpful model that I kind of really promote with my own clients. This is actually a little poster I made for someone to help them kind of visualize and see this. But it's a really useful way to think in the moment about the emotion regulation systems of our learners. It's a really simple and effective way to think about it, and it kind of also really kind of captures a way for us to better understand children with kind of like special education needs, children with kind of difficulties in doing this, because we all have these systems, and that is our drive system, which is kind of our feelings of being motivated, driven, excited. And those are the things that kind of make us want to achieve goals, to do things, to consume, to kind of find food as well, or accomplish a task. And we have our threat system, so that's our fight, flight, freeze response that Susie was talking about. That kind of, its function is to keep us safe, to manage threats, to protect us, to help us survive, to help us find something safe. And that's the kind of feelings of like anxiety, anger, disgust, sadness, and like I said in the previous slide, shame. So actually, shame is a really quick way to activate someone's threat system. And then the other system is the soothing system, and that's where we do our learning. That's where we kind of do our processing, our emotional processing, and that's kind of to slow down, to soothe, to rest, to feel safe, to feel kind, to feel cared for. And I've just written as well a feeling of being connected, and this is where I'm getting at with the attunement thing. Is actually co-regulation is about kind of activating that soothing system for our children. So as a kind of fairly well-regulated person, my threat system's a bit high today, but we all switch between these. They all provide an important role. They should be functioning effectively, and they should be balanced. So as you can see in this kind of visualization, they're all present and they're all balanced, and we can move and transition between them by ourselves. As a child, you need someone to co-regulate to help you do this, and that could be because of kind of like disability, kind of neurodivergence. It could be because of trauma is a huge one. Kind of just children that haven't been supported in their childhood to develop their capacity to self-regulate. And that can cause kind of quite severe unbalancedness. And in general, we kind of see overactivation of two of these systems, and some little visuals to help you see, like, when one of those systems becomes out of whack, it really encroaches on kind of, if our drive system, actually it encroaches on our soothing system. Right? If our drive system is always going, we're always trying to achieve, we're always trying to do something, we can't soothe, we can't stop, we can't slow down. And it also affects our threat system. Like, we might do things that put us in a really unsafe place. And so that kind of, like, I always think of an example being someone really stuck on a video game and it's just playing for hours and hours and hours. We see that with some of our students sometimes, and actually to the detriment of everything else. And it's really important to kind of understand that this is actually because of an overactive drive system. And actually, overactive threat is probably the big one that you probably most often think of, is those massive outbursts of anger or anxiety, that kind of fight, flight, they're the big visual kind of things. And again, we all have those emotions, we can regulate ourselves and kind of stop it taking control. But again, with kind of anxiety that might come from a communication disorder or trauma or things like that, actually that threat system can be going all the time. And it's so important to kind of be able to kind of view that and think about how we're going to kind of attune to these children to help them co-regulate, because we need to boost their soothing system to kind of help get these drives back in line. And that's kind of what Susie and Liz have been talking about, is kind of these things that we can do in their environment, and these kind of the things that Susie was suggesting with kind of regulating them are so powerful and so important to keep us feeling safe. So some like practical things again is like, how can we support children with their emotion regulation? So again, like I was saying, the first step is to notice your own feelings. We can't support someone to regulate if we're not regulated ourselves. So actually just taking a breath. I mean, we've all done that when something has happened in the classroom or in the school, and that's because we are good at co-regulating generally. We know we need to just take a breath, and actually that kind of noticing yourself. So am I feeling overwhelmed? Am I feeling frustrated because this is the 10th time today? Am I feeling completely de-skilled is one that we think, actually, like, I don't know what to do here. And that kind of panic, that anxiety can really creep in. And so we just need to kind of notice those feelings and kind of address them, notice that in ourselves, and get our regulation going, get our soothing system activated, however that may be, in order to then support and regulate someone else. And again, that's to do with that attunement of don't attune to anxiety with anxiety, for example. So I'm just going to also talk about another 3, and this is the 3 R's model, another really helpful way to think. And I think this is the one takeaway I want you to get from today is, I think this is, again, what Susie and Liz have been talking about as well, is the importance of kind of how we approach regulating our students. So kind of structuring it. So this model's developed by Dr. Bruce Perry. And we need to intervene in a sequence to help a child to learn to think and reflect and to support their capacity to self-regulate. I think this is the thing that, in my experience, quite often seen, people go to that reason state straight away. And that isn't helpful. The first thing we need to do is to help the child to regulate and calm their fight, flight, freeze system. And we can do that in a number of ways that kind of Susie and Liz have been talking about, whether that's kind of environmental changes, kind of through language, through understanding, or through physical regulation, or emotional regulation, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And then that's when the kind of related and connectedness comes through in the relate step, is once the child is kind of regulated, we need to relate to them. We need to make them feel safe. We need to make them feel kind of understood, to be heard, to be validated. Again, these are words I'm going to talk about more. But yeah, we just want to be attuned to them and be sensitive to them and be understanding. And then once we've done those things, we can kind of help the child to reflect, learn, remember, kind of articulate what those emotions were, what those feelings were, what that dysregulation was about. And kind of that's when we develop our own regulation skills, our own self-awareness, our own self-assuredness. So, doing okay for time. So the first one is regulating. So ways that we can regulate our child children's emotions is kind of take them somewhere safe and comfortable is a really simple thing. Get them out of that environment if it's safe to do so. Kind of really think about the language that you're using with any child, but in particular, if your child has additional needs, then have these things in place that kind of can support the language that you're using with them. Physical comfort, and I'm not talking about kind of a hug or anything kind of like inappropriate. I'm talking about a weighted blanket, a teddy, a sensory toy. Those kind of things are so important in that initial step of regulating. And Susie's talked about the importance of breathing. So regulating breathing exercises and ways to ground ourselves. One that I've used countless times is kind of going for a walk and just kind of focusing on the senses. It's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing that you can taste. And that doesn't necessarily mean kind of putting something in your mouth. It could just be thinking of something. So right now I can taste the 10 coffees that I've had this morning. I think that's all I want to say about that. And then the kind of relate stage is kind of this, those kind of skills about kind of just identifying for the child how they're feeling. So I'm noticing that you look angry, upset, frustrated, and kind of, whilst being wary of that kind of attuning too much to that emotion, kind of mirror it. So actually, if a child is coming screaming at you, kind of like, I'm really angry, and you're like, yes, I can see that you're really angry, kind of attune to that affect of them. Or like we saw in that video example, actually, if the child is upset, kind of being able to hold that kind of upset with them and kind of communicating that through your tone of voice is a really powerful tool to kind of immediately kind of give them that sense of being understood, validates that feeling for them. And it's just tone of voice is a really simple way to kind of really consciously think about how we're going to relate and understand children at school. And again, acknowledge validation is such a huge part of attunement and emotion regulation. So acknowledging that unpleasant feeling, like saying that must be really tough. Like I can see that that's really difficult for you. It's not about those kind of traps that we fall into of kind of wanting to make things better. It's just validating that feeling of, yes, I can see that's really hard for you. So reassurance is another one. Like I am here to help you when you are ready. I want to be able to help, or can I go and get someone you know who can help you? Might be a more appropriate thing, depending on the child. And then the really key thing here is, as well with the relate, is like accept that actually as this is working, as you can see the child is kind of calming, you're getting that soothing system going, they're feeling safer. They're still processing at this point. Let them be in that soothing system, let them kind of process, understand what's going on. This is not the time to kind of return to the trigger that had caused this, or teaching, or trying to kind of reason out what's happened, because it's too fresh, and you're just going to kind of dysregulate. It kind of breaks that attachment and that attunement kind of going into it too soon. And yeah, I've just put at the bottom here again, it's just the importance of kind of really relating is all about kind of validating the feelings that our children are going through. And then just some simple strategies for reasoning is kind of helping them to identify the emotion that they were experiencing. So kind of like, I noticed that you were kind of clenching your fists and gritting your teeth and shouting and kind of like that seems like anger to me. And getting them to think about that, noticing those parts of our bodies that might have been kind of activated by our threat system. Identifying, going through the things that might have happened with them, things that we can control, things that the child can control themselves, things that they can control when they get the right help and support, and actually identifying things that beyond their control, and actually, because we don't want someone just to feel like they can control everything, and that's just not true. And it's important to kind of notice those things that are kind of just beyond control. It's really helpful to kind of reflect together and like collaborate with our learners on what an alternative way of handling that might have been. And also another really tricky one for a lot of children, depending on the developmental stage, but actually to mentalize what it was like for others to experience that. And again, being really careful of kind of like shame in doing that. So not that made me feel really kind of, etc. But yeah. And again, just emphasizing that going straight for reasoning before you've kind of regulated and relating is not going to work. At that point, you just have to consider those systems, that dysregulation, that disconnectedness they're going to feel from others. So here's just a slide of like things that we can do with our language, with our relationship, that kind of are ways that soothe and balancing our emotions. So you can can see like affection and kindness from others, being valued by others, being heard and understood, kind of validation, social referencing, so actually like comforting to know that others have had the same feeling as us and can tolerate them. But really the three most important ones for this, I think, that can be used so easily are kind of just valuing our students, making them feel heard and understood, and kind of validating those emotions really do teach our children how to co-regulate, to get that experience of balancing our systems again. So ways that we can kind of value or show a child that they are valued is kind of just trying, actually, is that kind of, in therapy we talk about kind of discongruence, this kind of like honesty, and just like the fact that you are trying to help this child will really often be received and understood and processed, and that can be really valuing, like, okay, this person isn't 100% getting it, but they are trying, and for some that is a new experience for some of our some children that I've worked with, and that can be such an important thing. A lot of our students are autistic and they have special interests, and again, it's that honesty, spending 5 minutes just to talk about lawnmowers or Lego or Mario, like that is a really valuing thing. Like, I can see that this is interesting to you. And again, it's about that honesty, like really take a genuine interest in them. Like, what is it about their interest that really excites them? Kind of get excited with them, value them, value their interest, value them as a person. And things that I use in music therapy kind of to show and communicate that value are things like turn-taking games. So a really easy one to use in the classroom is taking a drum and going around a circle and just responding to and attuning to every child in what they do. So actually, if a child does a great big hit, you do a great big hit back. If they make a big excited face, make a big excited face back. If they tickle or tap the drum, tickle and tap, and kind of attune your voice and match that. And then consider that actually for some of our students with kind of limited mobility or movement, a small gesture might actually be really big. So if they've kind of really struggled to hit the drum or just missed it or something like that, affect attune to that, match that, give a big hit and response so that you recognize that you've... Hello? I don't know what that was, but okay, I'm gonna carry on. Yeah, and breaking down, like as a music therapist, I quite often talk about kind of breaking down language and communication into kind of really simple steps. So like rhythm is an important part of language, pitch, just focusing on one little aspect of kind of a communication and kind of using that, a gesture, a sound, kind of breaking that right down to a really simple thing can be a really easy way to kind of communicate that to a child. I'll talk about that on this side. So kind of, which goes on to that being heard and understood. So actually we have non-verbal children, and a way to kind of hear and understand them is kind of vocal imitation. So actually, and it's not copying, and it can quite often feel like you are kind of taking the mickey, but it's not. It's a really important part of kind of getting that turn-taking interaction going, like imitate their vocalizations. And again, it doesn't need to be exact. It doesn't need to be copied exactly, but just kind of imitate, attune to that with them. I've seen children in my work kind of, this is the first step to kind of moving from non-verbal to verbal. It gets children really excited because they're being heard and understood at their level. And that makes interacting with people more interesting. It makes relationships more interesting. And then we can actually co-regulate our children, because suddenly we've got a child that is interested in relating to us and experiencing that co-regulation for them. I can think of an example of a child we've worked with where it was just making silly noises into a microphone for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and they're acquiring language now. And I think that's because the class team have been doing this really regularly with them, and they've been doing it in therapy, and it's a really powerful kind of strategy to use. You may have heard of intensive interaction. Again, it's those kind of that idea of kind of being with, and the first step of that is kind of sharing a space with the child. So even if you just sit with them and just do the activity that they're doing, near them, just getting them used to kind of being with someone and co-regulating with them, because that activity quite often is a soothing thing for them. So just be with them in that soothing state can then facilitate kind of an excitement about kind of being with someone and developing relationships. So things like, again, with the drum game, when I'm talking about considering their needs in the classroom activity, it's kind of just that recognition of like, oh, you want to go really quiet. Okay, I'll go really quiet with you, and just kind of getting them to feel validated by that. How are we doing for time? I think we're okay. Just to do, I can't resist having one clip of music therapy in here. I'd love to share a clip of my own work, but I'm just going to show you a minute of some music therapy with this boy, where you get to see that kind of that realization of this young boy realizing that he's being attuned to by the music therapist, and you can see the joy that of just in the room. It's just a really lovely example of kind of a simple thing of just jumping off of a drum and just trying to attune to them, and how powerful it can be. And you see the moment when Benji realizes this. Lovely example of kind of how, and don't let the piano put you off. That can be done with a drum, just tapping. It doesn't need to be anything clever at all. I think we're pretty much there. Just like kind of something to reflect on going away with this is kind of maybe just think about some games or activities that you do in your classroom that might have an aspect to them that demonstrates kind of to students that they're being valued, being heard and understood. And just like really notice the importance of that, and that really functions for our students in kind of that. One point that kind of I've missed out here is kind of do this when they're regulated, do this when they're calm, when they're soothed, because they will learn to do that when they are not. That's part of the co-regulation process. And just thinking about how you might make some adaptations for kind of your children to kind of also feel valued, heard, and understood. Thank you. That was half an hour, so I will stop talking. I'm going to pass back over to Susan.
Thank you, Simon. So thank you for listening. What we aimed for was just to give you lots and lots of practical strategies that you could go away and use in your classroom settings. I hope you have gained something from our discussion today. We've just written our email address on the end of the slideshow. We're very aware this is a recorded presentation and it's not allowed for any interaction. So any questions you have about the signposting we've done or any inquiries we can answer, we are happy if you do want to email us with those. So yeah, bear that in mind, and thank you for listening.